Murder Princess first came out in 2007, was bounced over to the States, and spun around the rim before flopping unceremoniously into the bargain bin. Is there no room in the hearts of otaku for a little 6-episode OVA? Well, apparently not. So this one is based on a manga rather than a completely original work, which usually affords it more story stability and a more focused vision. Of course, it won't help anything if the focused vision is still cross-eyed. So it's important to note that since Slayers, there hasn't really been a premier high fantasy anime to gain big-time fame. Ever since then, the series that have been jockeying for that coveted spot have just been throwing spaghetti at a wall and seeing what sticks. Shows like Scrap Princess and Konosuba have a limited sort of appeal, regardless of their quality. And none of them have ended up with the enormous quantity of works to their names that Slayers does. What does this have to do with Murder Princess? Well, let's just say it ain't exactly starting a franchise. What's important to note about shows that look like this, specifically, is that it discounts shows like Record of Lodoss War or Berserk, because this is a more Slayers-y type show. This brings in certain expectations about how the tone of the show will be, otherwise it risks seeming dissonant. The more realistic your characters look, the more realistic you should make the story, to an extent. By the same token, if you make a crop of big-eyes, small-mouth characters, if it gets dark, it has to be balanced against those character designs so it doesn't unravel. Mangaka Sekihiko Inoue, a favorite of mine actually, was fresh off of doing Comic Party when he created this, but that was an adaptation, and he had the experience of a doujin author to pull from for that. This doesn't have quite the same depths, and his noobishness shows in the storytelling. Alright, now that that arduous journey is over, let's get this party started already. The story of Murder Princess concerns two women, Princess Alita and Ferris the Bounty Hunter, who get wrapped up in a plot to overthrow the Kingdom of Forland in a fantasy world inhabited by mad scientists, weird Frankensteins, and little skull goblins. Getting right into that fantasy bit, that's for sure. The kingdom is already under siege by something horrible, something unknowable, something terrifying. Oh my god, it's even more hideous than I could have imagined! Spirit, show me no more. Yes, this show has Lolita robots, because of course it does. During the fighting in the castle, which apparently means that this is a pretty badly defended fortress, the king is fatally injured and sends Alita away to keep her safe from the enemy. Her body double is left in her place, and things don't end well for the poor girl, as you can imagine. While she's making tracks, she's accosted by a monster in the forest that Follis is battling in, and ends up crashing into her, knocking them both off of a cliff. And because it's clearly such a high cliff, both women are killed instantly on the rocks below. Show over. I kid, of course, but weirdly enough, the two somehow switch bodies, leading to more than a little confusion. Lucky for Follis, now called Alita, for the sake of my own sanity, she doesn't lose her edge when she has to go and kick a little ass. Even though Alita, now in Ferris's body, who I'll be calling Milano for reasons that'll become obvious later, is pretty much useless now. Upon figuring out this wild situation they've been thrust into, they figure the best thing they can do is assert dominance and retake the castle. Which they do, with one princess with a sword, a Frankenstein, and Sans' cousin. Before the king's ass groove is even mussed, they've booted the baddies out of the castle and turned in for the night. That's episode 1. Episode 2 sees Ferris, now incognito as Milano, the name of her dead handmaiden, trying to teach the rather crass Alita how to be a princess. There's a checklist here that usually accompanies episodes like this, and they'd be remiss if they didn't get basically all of them. Of course, then they have to do a coronation parade, which almost gets JFK'd by a giant monster. Alita springs into action, and now we see she's also got a berserker mode, which surprises even her boys Pete and Stunty. It's then promptly forgotten about until much later. In episode 3, Milano gets captured, and while Alita rushes to the rescue, the powers that be decided that they needed a man to save them, and they're bailed out by a mysterious swordsman. These 2 episodes don't really do much for the plot, and once again, I'm confronted by the weird nature of my own mind working, where, in my brain, everything should be for the betterment of the plot. In short, why in the hell is there filler in a 6-episode OVA? That's not entirely fair, I'll admit, but considering how much of the plot happens in the back half of the show, it could have been much simpler, or at least streamlined. When a show starts to meander like this, especially when it's an OVA, it just seems like the writing staff isn't in control of the plot threads. There's more than a little Yuri baiting in this too, which is so very tiresome these days. Even for a series that came out in 2007, it seems like a throwback at this point. Also, let's try not to think too hard on the fact that these people are apparently falling for themselves. Now that Kaito, the prince, is back, he can become king and let Alita and Milano get to the business of getting their bodies swapped back. Or can they? Enters Cecilia, who tricks Alita into going downstairs into the basement, where the super spooky family secret is held. Dr. Akamatsu and his lowly bot show up again, but he's quickly dispatched by the Black Knight, who turns out to be Kaito in disguise. Cecilia is a witch who has eyes on the prize inside the vault, and Kaito gives Alita a good thrashing before denouncing them all publicly as rebels and booting them out of the castle. Episode 5 is the plot-heavy episode, and it turns out that the fantasy world is our world after all, and Alita is the key to opening the vault leading to Teoria, some manner of lost technology from the old world. Kaito getting his hands on it would be extremely bad. Now, I'll hold off on the story synopsis from there. Go check in on it for yourself if you're really that interested. However, let me just hold there for a minute and sling some criticism. There was a strange trend for a bit there to raise the stakes super high in these sorts of shows by making the big bad want to wipe out everything. And this show has the same concept in mind here. Like Falcon from the movie version of Escaflowne, the goal is stated to be delete everything and start over, because the world is sad and things don't go well all the time. I feel I would be remiss if I held my tongue and did not say that this is fucking stupid on a number of levels. But at the same time, the other caveat of these sorts of characters also seems to include fuck me as well. Which means that they at least understand what they're doing extends to them. It doesn't make it any more sensible. It just means that they're willing to go down with the ship. So that's all well and good, but man, is that a nuclear fucking option that seems so childish? And if that was the way that they tried to stop the big bads from doing this, I think I'd probably be more okay with it, but it's more in the vein of, oh, don't do that because it's not nice, instead of, don't do that for this list of perfectly adequate reasons. But the show ends with some hard choices that I think would have felt more important if we had had more time with the characters. So here's a conundrum for you. How can a show be too short and too long all at the same time? The problem here is that they're expecting us to care about these fellas a little bit more than we're given adequate time to. But we're also working with the feeling that they could have sped it along a bit more. The whole business seems like there should have been an entire series following Ferris, Dom, and Pete, so we get an adequate appraisal of their daring do, and then mixed Alita in later. So when we're stuck in the middle with the way the show plays out, it just kind of feels like a thick gray paste of an anime. The dub cast, however, is great, featuring Monica Rial and Colleen Clinkenbeard in the starring roles, and it's pretty par for the course. The show had originally been licensed by ADV Films, but had gotten transferred over to Funimation in 2008. The show itself left me a little bit cold, honestly, and I spent the 3 hours watching it wondering if I could be doing something a little bit more important. But I also had a Gunpla to build, so I figured it was a wash either way. The show is just kind of there. It exists and then it doesn't. It's not bad, but it's not an instant classic by any stretch of the imagination. If I had to come up with a snappy descriptor for it in shows of its ilk, it's a potato chip. It takes up space, it has a certain taste to it, but ultimately it's quite flat. It's basically the anime equivalent of junk food, and while sometimes you really want to eat some junk food, you can't eat it all the time. So while I won't be shooting it into space in rage, I also won't be giving it the royal treatment.